fisherman says to him, well, I've caught enough for my family today. I think that'll be enough. Well, this businessman says to him, but if you caught more, you could buy a bigger boat. Well, the fisherman says, okay, well then what? He says, well, if you buy a bigger boat, then you can go out and catch more fish and buy several more boats after that. And the fisherman says, all right, then what? What do I got to do after that? Well, he said, then you can buy a whole fleet of these boats. You can have these fishermen going out, and you could have them working for you, and then you could sit back and retire early and be wealthy like me. And he says, well, what would I do when I retire? Well, the wealthy man says, well, you can sit back by the beach and relax and spend time with your family. And he says, what do you think I'm doing right now? It's a funny lesson, but it's reflective of our current society. Unfortunately, we live in a time and an age and a nation that incentivizes discontentment. We live in a nation that is surrounded and pushed by the thought of consumerism, having what's new, having what's better, always seeking to get something more for yourself, never being content with what you have. But the Bible teaches us and tells us a whole different perspective we are to have as Christians. If you will, open your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 13. We're going to be looking at contentment of the Christian. And if you look at that word contentment, it is defined, as you're turning to Hebrews 13, in Merriam-Webster's dictionary as having peace or satisfaction with the particular things that you have. Peace and satisfaction with particular things that you have. And if you look at the book of Hebrews, we want to put this book in its context before we dive into the text. But I want us to think about the writer and who he is writing to. In Hebrews chapter 13, the Hebrew writer, who is unknown to us, although some speculate who that might be, he is writing to a Jewish audience. He is writing at around the time of 63, 64 AD, when the church in Jerusalem and round about that area was suffering extreme persecution from Jewish teachers. At this time, it would have been a very difficult time to be a Christian, because the laws of Christ would conflict with many of the laws of Moses. And throughout the book of Hebrews, the writer is encouraging his audience that Christ is far superior than the things that were brought about by Moses. That Christ is superior in every way. Christ is above the angels. Christ is above the law of Moses. Christ is above the priests that were given to the people. Christ was above all the covenants that were given to the children of Israel. And we see that throughout all the many chapters. And the book of Hebrews does a great job at warning Christians, telling them to maintain their faithfulness, not to drift, to assemble together with the saints during these hard times, during these persecutions, and during a time of Judaistic teaching. It would call for Christians in Hebrews chapter 12 to live faithfully. That's what that whole chapter is about in Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 11 encourages them to undergo the same faith that could cause you even to lose your own life. But when you get to chapter 13, it's very interesting, because it is a bow tie, a summary of Christian conduct. And the Hebrew writer here gives basically a rapid fire summary of practical things Christians are to do in their everyday lives. So he is going to give many different aspects here of Christian responsibility, to be faithful, to be pure, to be steadfast, all of these different things, to obey people who are in the congregation, who are teaching the Word. And it would ground them to listen to Christian theology, essentially. So you get that with the audience here. And as somebody who is getting this writing, sometimes it's hard for us to truly understand what it would be like to be in the audience's shoes. We're living here in the United States. We have a government that isn't persecuting us outright. We have comforts beyond comprehension that the folks at this particular time wouldn't understand. We have religious freedoms, religious liberties. We live in a very tolerant area of Christianity. So it's really hard to understand what some of these folks were going through and why this letter needed to be written in the first place. But I want you all to put yourselves in these people's shoes. I want you to imagine facing pressure and persecution like Paul faced during the time of his life, like Peter faced as a Christian in Jerusalem. Can you imagine the same type of persecution that Christ faced would be the same type of persecutions these people would have been facing? They would have been facing all manner of ill treatment. They would have been tempted beyond what we could imagine to revert back to their Judaistic ways. Can you imagine the threatening of your children, the lives of your spouse, your family? If you don't turn to Judaism, we will destroy you. Can you imagine that? It's pretty difficult in the country that we live in to really quantify these things and put them into perspective. But this is what the people that the Hebrew writer was writing to were facing. There was a true cost of discipleship. There was a true cost to being a believer in Christ. Something we oftentimes forget to see in our lives today. But they needed encouragement to stay faithful. And in Hebrews chapter 13, the writer here is going to emphasize some characteristics that they were to have. How should Christians live when following Jesus is costly? Well, let's see. Let's see how Christians are to live. In Hebrews chapter 13, verses 5 and 6, the writer speaks to these people and says to them, "Let your conversation or your attitudes, your lifestyle, be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he hath said, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee, so that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what man shall do to me." So the Hebrew writer writes to them and tells them really three things in these two texts. This is going to be a 3-point sermon on contentment. The first being, there is a command to obey, if you're taking notes. Our first point we're going to look like is there is a command to obey. Our second, a promise to believe. A promise to believe. And our third point will be that there is a confession to declare. A confession to declare. But looking at this first point, a command to obey. The writer here says, let your conversation or your attitude, your lifestyle, be without covetousness. Be without covetousness. Now, covetous, if you don't know, is the complete opposite of contentment. I want you to think the lifestyle of many Americans today. Every gas station you go to, what's at the front counter? What do you see sitting there at the front? Being advertised and flashing. You see the Texas Powerball, and you see a long list of scratchers there, what we call them. And you think to yourselves, how could people come up on a day-to-day basis and spend all of their hard-earned money on these pieces of paper for what? For what reason? It has been simply explained as wanting more than what you have at that current point. And we live in a society today that capitalizes on covetousness. We live in a society today where you can download an app and you can gamble if it's going to rain tomorrow. There's apps out there that you can gamble if it's going to be sunny, windy. You can gamble on if people are going to win elections. You can gamble on pretty much anything. The options are unlimited nowadays. Even famous stocks and economic apps like Robinhood and Charles Schwab, they're offering what is known as predictive markets to our youth. You may not be familiar with these things. Some of you may. But there are predictive markets that capitalize on people who are not content monetarily with what they have. So they're trying to find the fastest way to earn money. So you're willing to bet on if it's going to rain tomorrow in Rising Star, which I wouldn't do that. Somebody made a joke about the flood earlier. They said when the flood came down in the book of Genesis during our Sunday morning Bible class that Rising Star got 3/4 of an inch during that flood. But in all seriousness, when we look at the problems that arise from covetousness, it is so counterintuitive to the Christian religion. It is in complete opposition. Gambling, adultery, many different problems arise from this mentality, arise from this attitude of, I am not content with what God has blessed me with at this particular moment. Our society teaches us as individuals that we are to think of ourselves as cogs in the wheel and that we need to break out. We need to get something greater. As our joke was this morning, we need to buy bigger boats. We need to be more wealthy, or you won't be happy. But this is in complete opposition to what God tells us in the book of Hebrews. In Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 6, He says, "Be not covetous." God demands a lifestyle where we love Him and we love and enjoy the things that we have. We have to love and be content and enjoy the things that we have. It's completely contrary to our society. When you have to have the newest phone, you have to have the nicest car, you have to have a better boat, better guns is my problem. I want all the fancy firearms that I can get my hands on. But unfortunately, that comes with a pretty hefty price tag. But if you're into cars, into vehicles, those things can also be pretty pricey, pretty hefty. But there are many things that the world tries to throw at you as individuals to not be content with what you have, to be looking for that next fix. And we can't be covetous. We can't look at others and think to ourselves, I need that more than them. I want that more than them. They don't deserve it, is the attitude of a covetous person. I deserve this thing. I need this thing. And covetous, it's famously been said that it always whispers, just a little more. Just a little more. You won't be satisfied with these things. If you read through the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 10, Solomon, the writer who has had everything, tells us, you will not be satisfied with these things. You won't be. If you're looking at hitting the right amount of money to be satisfied in your life, you're never going to get there. You're going to keep working. You're going to keep spinning for that ideal. If you want to have the nicest whatever it is, insert name here. You will always be searching for these things. The Christian cannot be looking with a covetous attitude. Contentment is a command by God. I want us to notice that in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 5. He says, be not covetous. And in the same turn, he says, be content. This isn't a suggestion. This isn't the, hey, you should be happy with what you have. This is a command. Each and every one of us has a responsibility to be happy with what God has blessed us with. Be content. It's not laziness. That's not what we're talking about. That doesn't mean you quit your jobs. That's not what contentment is. Contentment isn't laziness. Contentment isn't complacency. God tells us from the Spirit in Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 10 that all things that we should do with all of our might. Whatever our hands find to do with our might. And Galatians reinforces this idea in the New Testament that whatever we do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord. It doesn't mean we're lazy. It doesn't mean we're complacent. But we have to accept God's providence, His provision, the things that He has so richly blessed us with this day. Oftentimes we look past all the blessings that we have, that God has given us, and we think more. Rather than giving thanks for our lunch, we're thinking about dinner. Rather than being satisfied with what we have there, we're already thinking ahead. Where am I going to eat later this evening? And it's something that, if you're not careful with, it could easily dig its way in every single one of our characteristics. And that breeds covetousness and all manner of sins that stem from this attitude. We have to be content. And contentment is not found in earthly and worldly possessions, but rather it is found in our perspective as Christians. Our minds are the key tool used to be content. I've also heard it said that contentment does not come from what you have, but from who has you. Are you someone who believes that you are had by God? Are you in His possession? Well, that should bring a whole litany of contentment. It should be. We should have very satisfied and fulfilling lives. So, this command would be impossible, though, of being content without the reason that follows here in Hebrews chapter 5 and 6. There's a reason that follows. God never demands something from us without having a reward or a stipulation attached to it. I want y'all to notice that. Now we will see the solid foundation for contentment, and that is a promise to believe. God promises are personal and perpetual. Look at verse 5 and 6 with me again. He says here, "And be content with such thing as ye have, for He hath said." Who is He hath said? "I will never leave thee nor forsake thee." That is the stipulation alongside of be not covetous and be content. Because of this, He says, "For I will never leave thee nor forsake thee." There's a promise attached. And it's a personal promise. It's a perpetual promise. God does not lie. And this phrase here in the Greek can be rendered, "I will never, never, never abandon you," is the idea in the Greek language behind this phrase. I will never, never, never abandon you. It's a perpetual statement made here. And God would repeat this promise not just in the New Testament, but also in the Old Testament. In Deuteronomy chapter 31 and verse 6, God tells His children, "Be strong and of a good courage, for thy Lord thy God will not fail thee, nor forsake thee." In Joshua chapter 1 and verse 5, God would say it again to Joshua. He would say, "For the Lord will not forsake His people." Psalm chapter 37 and verse 25, "I have been young, and now I am old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken." We should be content because God is not going to forsake us if we are righteous in doing what is right in His sight. We should be content. That should be the promise that fulfills us as individuals. Not how much money we have, not how much land we own, not how many houses or cars or clothes or money we have in the bank, but that there is a promise that God gives us that He will not leave us and forsake us if we do what is right. There's no price tag you can put on God's presence. $0. Nothing. It's priceless. Yet how often do we find ourselves yearning after more? More. This cannot be a characteristic of the Christian. Why is that? Because contentment rests in a God who stays. But you know what will leave for all of us? Your health may fail. Possessions may go. We've suffered fires here in Rising Star, haven't we? We understand what that looks like. We've suffered floods in Texas. We've suffered a great many different problems. Bankruptcy, mortgages lapsing, all these different things that could come about and take your wealth. Your possessions are not promised to you. Your health although sometimes we think it is not promised to you. Being healthy is not something God says is a guarantee for the Christian. Your friends are not a guarantee for the Christian. Your friends may change. Don't put your faith in them. Your circumstances may crumble, but God says, I will never leave nor forsake you. That's the only thing that's consistent in this life. God's presence. Not even your own spouse can fill that position. Your children, neither. So if God produces obedience and the promise that He gives us produces us peace, the result should be that Christians have courage. Christians should have courage. And God's presence should produce a bold confession, is what Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 6 says. Let's read that possession one more time. It says, here the Hebrew writer says, so that we, that being the faithful children of God, may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will never leave thee. The Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what man shall do unto me. Should be the mindset. Because we understand that God will not leave us, because we are not covetous and content with what we have, the result should be a confession that we are able to declare all throughout our lives. As Christians, sometimes we walk around like we've been weaned off a sour pickle. We walk around like this. We have a God who satisfies. We should be content, joyous, happy in this life. What is there to be upset about? We have a God who will not leave us or forsake us. He is our helper. What do we got to be negative about? Yet how often do we see that in our own lives? Are we bold about what God has done for us, or are we always talking bad about our situations and circumstances? Are we always in the negative? Woe is me! God has left me in this difficult position. Is this what the Hebrews writer tells the people who are suffering? Does he tell them to have that attitude? So if they're going through much more than what we have here, why aren't we excited and joyous for the blessings? And why can't we boldly proclaim that God is our helper and that He is with us? This isn't an arrogance when we boldly proclaim these things. We don't walk around higher and mighty than everyone else, although we talked about it a little this morning. If you are doing what's right in the sight of God, you are holier than the rest of the people. You are set apart. You are sanctified. But as we go about our lives, we can boldly say to people, when we lose our health, when we lose our belongings, we can encourage others. We can benefit them by saying, God has helped me through these things. And without God, I am nothing. When we lose our loved ones, God is with us. He has helped us through these things. When we lose our homes, when we lose our possessions, God is with me. So it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, the material things that flee, that are fleeting from our own lives. But remember, our society makes these things difficult to grasp. The comforts that we have in this life makes these concepts difficult to cling on to and to grasp. But God expects that from those who are suffering persecution. He's surely going to want it from us who are doing pretty good. So how are we living our lives? Is Christ our helper? Is that someone we boldly proclaim? Is the Lord on our side? In Psalm chapter 118 and verse 6 it says, the Lord is on my side. I will not fear what man can do unto me. When you are a faithful child of God, a man can threaten your life and it is meaningless because the Lord is on my side. You can take my life, sure. But there is a limited power. It's all physical, it's all fleeting that man has. Help from God is continual, it's practical, it's powerful, and it's everlasting if we are doing what is right. And that doesn't mean God is going to promise us a trouble-free life. I want to reiterate that again. It doesn't mean we're not going to suffer with hardship, with trials, with different difficult circumstances. But we can go about this life saying, I will not fear what man can do to me. Man may threaten us, may take our goods, may oppose us, but God's power is limitless. And courage should be the characteristic that flows from contentment. Courage should be the characteristic that is enforced by this idea that material things aren't going to keep me going in this life. I've seen it too many times. Those in the world who have the seed sown, Christ will say, many will undergo hardship, circumstances, and that seed will be taken from their lives. It'll be plucked away, it'll be destroyed, and the cares of this world takes it and scoops it up and it's gone. There's nothing left. Do we truly understand and have God as our foundation? Jesus Christ, is He our rock? His sayings in Matthew chapter 7. He says, those who hear my words and do them are like a wise man who built their house upon a rock. Something that is strong, eternal, and will not go away. Because the Hebrew writers here says that whatever you're going through, let your conversation, your attitude, be without covetousness, and be with content with such things as ye have, for He has said, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee, so that we may boldly say that the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what man can do to me. Contentment is not a luxury, but it is a command from God. He expects every single one of us to obey this command. If we reject covetousness, good, because it weakens our walk. If I'm not content with my wife, what is the next step? Look for another. That's the next step. If I'm not content with what I have, with what God offers, what am I going to look for? I'm going to look for something else to fill that void. It's perpetual, it's enslaving, it's bondage, and it is not the type of thing that a Christian should be subject to and or under. We have to embrace commitment because God is enough in our lives. We may say it, God is everything that I need, but how many of us actually live it? It's easy to say something like that, but does our actions speak louder than our words? Do we live courageously in our lives because the Lord is our helper? Or are we scared of the next day? Are we scared what is going to happen to our bodies? Are we going throughout life fearing the next thing? Because if you truly believe and are content with what you have, you'll live your life courageously, worry-free. But if not, why not? Christians, the world may change. We are not promised to live this life of luxury that we have in the United States. We should be content and thankful for these many blessings. But this nation can quickly go downhill. If you look at the news, you see nations flipping, changing, going through drastic situations just overnight. I just saw an article last night, Mexico, their entire capital was overrun and destroyed last night. The people rose up and blew down the gates. I don't know what has happened since then, but one night, that's all it took for the nation to get overran. We are not promised to have the most ideal scenario. So let us learn now, because it is a learned characteristic. Being content is something you have to learn. It doesn't just come naturally. Our natural instinct is what? To want more. But we have to leave this idea, forsake the idea of more, and be happy with what God has so richly blessed each and every one of us. Doesn't mean we get lazy. It doesn't mean we stop working. But it means that we look at our lives and are satisfied with what we have. And because of that, each and every one of us have a promise that we could say, "The Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what man shall do to me." If you are a Christian, you can walk through this life with that mentality, with that lifestyle. And you can make these things right. Say you haven't been living a content life, you can make this right as a Christian. It starts here with the mind. Change your minds is what preaching is about. This idea of contentment, I haven't heard it preached all too often, but it's something that we have to have as Christians. And if you are not a child of God, if you are outside the church of Christ, you should not be content with where you are at. Because if you are outside the ark, outside of safety, you are an enemy of God. You are in opposition to His will. Because Christ says time and time again, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. You will be a part of His church and a part of His body. But if you are not a part of it, you are outside looking in opposition to God. And you have the opportunity today to make those very things right. And then you can live a life of contentment, knowing that you are safe where you are, that you are doing the will of God. If you have a need, whether you're a Christian or a brother or sister in Christ, the opportunity is yours today as we stand and sing the invitation song. Jesus calling.